Last year, I posted a video that summarizes the mountaineering training principles from the book Training for the New Alpinism and introduces a spreadsheet I created to develop custom training plans for any mountaineering objective. In this video, I want to reflect on how the training went for me and whether it was effective. Training for the New Alpinism provides an incredible starting point for developing a training plan. But the downside of the book is that you have to work out all the details yourself. I created a spreadsheet because I wanted a way to calculate how much training of each type I needed to complete each week automatically, based on a starting training volume that was appropriate for me. I was preparing for a summit of Point Lenana on Mount Kenya, an objective I chose because a good friend of mine from college lives in Nairobi, and I was traveling there to attend his wedding. This friend and myself and two others decided to hike Mount Kenya together after the wedding. And if you're wondering why he went on this hike instead of going on a honeymoon, all I can say is ask him. Mount Kenya itself was a stunningly beautiful place to spend 4 days, and it was even better to spend those days in good company. Mount Kenya National Park requires the use of a guide to enter the park, including for those who wish to trek to Point Lenana. We hired an incredible guide named Boniface to lead us. Boniface works with 4 porters who carried our heavy gear, as well as cooking supplies and food. There is a purist in me that would have liked to carry all of our own gear and to have cooked our own food, but Boniface and his team were highly professional and cooked us delicious meals each day. It made the entire process enjoyable in a different way for us. Our route started at the Siramon Gate of Mount Kenya National Park. On the first day, we hiked to Old Moses Camp, covering about 5.5 miles of trail and gaining almost 2,200 feet in elevation, ending at 10,800 feet. This hike took us about 3 hours, including 40 minutes of rest. On our second day, we hiked from Old Moses Camp to Shipton's Camp. We covered over 8.5 miles and gained another 3,000 feet of elevation, ending at 13,800 feet. This took 7.5 hours, but included a lot of breaks. According to my Garmin watch, we were only actually moving for about 3 hours and 15 minutes. On the third day, we went from Old Moses Camp up to Point Lenana. Then down to Minto's campsite. From Old Moses Camp, we gained 2,500 feet on our way up to Point Lenana at 16,355 feet and ended at Minto's campsite around 14,100 feet, or 300 feet higher than where we started at the beginning of that day. According to my watch, we were only moving for about an hour and a half of this time. Apparently, we rested for the other 4.5 hours of hiking time that day, during which we covered only about 3.5 miles. Finally, on day 4, we descended from Minto's campsite to the Chogoria Gate of Mount Kenya National Park. At about 10,000 feet, descending a little over 4,000 feet over the course of nearly 8.5 miles. This took 3 hours and 45 minutes, including 50 minutes of rest. So here's what I learned from applying the principles of training for the new alpinism to develop a training plan for Mount Kenya. First, I like heart rate as a rough guide to finding out which zone of training I'm in. It's more objective than relative perceived exertion, and I find this helpful. But I sometimes found it necessary to be flexible about the exact heart rate range and to rely instead on how I felt. Sometimes I felt I was still in zone 1 or 2, especially if I could easily breathe in and out through my nose, even if my heart rate was in my calculated zone 3 range. Second, over time, it became easier to complete zone 1 training without stopping to walk. I could simply keep running at a very slow pace. I took this as an indication that my aerobic fitness was improving. Third, even though training for the new alpinism base period training is not directly aimed at increasing VO2 max, it did improve mine slightly. My VO2 max level, as measured by my Garmin watch, went up a point from 52 to 53. Fourth, On the hike itself, my heart rate rarely went above 130, even at high altitude, and even on days when we gained 2 to 3,000 feet of elevation. My average heart rate each day was about 100. I take this as confirmation that developing a strong base through low intensity but long duration training is highly effective for high altitude endurance activities, even if the training is conducted at a low altitude like mine in Chicago. Fifth, and however, I don't believe this type of base training can help with altitude sickness per se. I think the most significant direct effect of altitude for me, above 14,000 feet, was loss of appetite and loss of interest in drinking water. During our third day, when we ascended from just under 14,000 feet to just over 16,000 feet over the course of several hours, I failed to drink enough water. By the time we arrived at our camp in the early afternoon, my head hurt and I felt so weak and nauseated that I had to spend the afternoon lying in the tent, where I mostly tossed and turned. I think this was due primarily to dehydration because I felt fine at the summit of Point Lenana at 16,000 feet, and because I started to feel better as soon as I forced myself to drink more water. Base training won't help with any of these problems, but it will reduce other problems related to fatigue. Even when I felt sick or had a headache, I never felt that the issue was with my endurance. I always felt that my legs could keep going. Sixth, I also think that strength training significantly improved my ability to handle our 4-day trek. Deadlifts, squats, and core strengthening left my core feeling incredibly stable and made my day pack feel light. Weighted step-ups and lunges meant that any terrain I needed to use my quads to ascend was no problem. I never felt sore during or after the hike, except for my calves, which is the one muscle I wish I had trained specifically but did not. Seventh, if I could redo my training, I would have started earlier on some kind of stair-step machine or uphill training exercise, rather than focusing primarily on slow running or jogging on flat ground. I also would have introduced lunges and step-ups earlier in my strength training regime and added some kind of calf exercise to the mix. I understand that the purpose of the base period is to develop a broad aerobic base, which is not specific to any kind of activity. But I think that I could have achieved the same benefit toward my aerobic base even while tailoring my exercises a little more directly to my objective. So these are my lessons learned from 12 weeks of base training to prepare for a 4-day trek to Point Lenana with nearly 8,000 feet of elevation gain. I'm curious what your experience has been with this type of training or on Mount Lenana. Have you used base period training or House and Johnston's book to prepare for a mountaineering objective? Have you used some other method that you found useful? I'd love to hear from you in the comments. If you'd like to check out my Peak Endurance Builder tool, you can learn all about it using the video linked in the description. And if you'd like to stay in touch, you can find me on Substack at Climb with Jimmy. Thanks for watching.